back to the show. After a brief break, I'm pleased to announce this exclusive interview with the next Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, Micah Beckwith. As a podcast host, I know that I have a diverse listener base, and you may not align with this guest's political views completely, but I'm asking that you enter the interview with an open mind because I'm sure that you will pick up some great leadership advice and insight from the next Lieutenant Governor of Indiana. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did when I was recording it, and without further ado, please enjoy the interview with the Lieutenant Governor-elect of Indiana, Micah Beckwith. Hello and welcome to Gen Z on Leadership. I'm Gabriel Gary, the host, and today I have with me on the show Indiana Lieutenant Governor-elect Micah Beckwith. Beckwith has a degree in business and economics from Huntington University. He is the Noblesville Campus pastor for Life Church, executive director of the Hoosier Leadership series, and is now the elect for the Lieutenant Governor of Indiana. Thank you so much for being on the show, Micah.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gabe. It's good to be with you all. And sorry, I'm in my car right now. I've got meetings today, so I had to cram it in. So it's not as formal as it normally is in my office, but it's a joy to be with you all.
It's great. I totally get it. It's definitely busy, especially right before your inauguration, just under a month here too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
My first question for you is, what inspired you to run for the position of Lieutenant Governor? And it was the closest Lieutenant Governor race I've probably seen. I mean, it was highly contested. So what really drove you through the race?
Well, it was a little unprecedented. We've really never had a lieutenant governor's race in the state of Indiana. So what I did this year was people have never really thought to do it or have done it. And so I think what drove me to do this was you got to go back probably 4 years ago. I mean, our government did things that were so egregious, so against the constitutional authority that the government has been given by the people. And when it comes to, shutting down business, shutting down churches, forcing people to stay in their homes, the labeling people essential, non-essential, the forcing of vaccines or masking up your kids in school, all of these things that I'm an American historian. I teach civics and history on the side, and what I noticed is that nowhere in the Constitution, nowhere in our founding documents does government have that type of authority. And so what I saw over the last 4 years was just this huge overreach by our government, federal, state, and local. And so I think that just sort of pushed me into saying, okay, what can be done to protect the liberties of people so that never happens again? And as I've been politically engaged, and I saw kind of maybe a blind spot in our government where the lieutenant governor is technically elected by the people, and I use air quotes because that lieutenant governor has never really been elected by the people, even though the position calls for the people to actually elect the lieutenant governor. And so what I did, normally what happens is the governor will tell the people who he or she wants for lieutenant governor, and then the people just have to vote for that person. Well, that's not really an election. To me, I don't like that. I don't like being told who to vote for. And so I just said, I'm going to run for lieutenant governor. And it wasn't something that we didn't have to change the rules or change the state constitution. Like, you can do it. It's just nobody's really ever thought to do it before. And so I jumped in and said, you know what? You're going to be told who to vote for, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to vote for who you think is best too. So there'll be a competition this time around. And the people loved it. I mean, overwhelmingly, the response was great. People loved the idea that we were given the power of the office back to the people. And so here we are, so it's just kind of one of those, I felt called. I felt God led me into this, and he opened the door, and we just kind of were obedient to walk it out, and here we are today. So that's really kind of what what spurred me into doing it. But ultimately, I'm going to be a wall of defense for the people. I mean, never again is government going to abuse the liberties of people like I saw over the last 4 years. At least not on my watch. And that really was why I got into this in the first place.
Absolutely. Second question for you now is, what are some core leadership values that are closest to you that you've held in your life as a pastor and now you're going to take to the lieutenant governor office?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I look at my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I mean, he's the greatest leader, and he embodied servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, Christ, he's the creator of the universe, and yet stepped off of his throne to serve people. The Bible says he did not come to be served, but rather to serve. And I think any leader, anyone in positions of authority or power, whether that's in government, whether that's in education, whether that's in business, leaders need to be first and foremost servant minded. And so I think that's the biggest attribute that I look for in leaders is, will you serve the people that you are leading? Will you do the jobs that nobody else likes to do? If you can't clean the toilets in the state house, then you have no business being in the highest office in the state house. And that's how I've always looked at it. And so whether it's from a pastoral perspective, a business perspective, leaders need to be servants first and foremost. And then you got to be people of integrity. You got to have character. You have to have a high moral standard. You have to be men and women of virtue. And so I think that's the other aspect is you have to be trustworthy. And so integrity is a big deal to me. And so I think those are the two greatest attributes of leadership. And then you get into the competency. Then you got to know what you know, and you got to know why you know it. And I always tell people, no matter what you're doing, you're always learning. So never stop learning. If you ever think you know it well enough, you're walking down a dangerous road, because you can always learn more. But you got to be competent. And so I'm a firm believer that God does not call the equipped; He equips the called. But once you're called, you have a duty and an obligation to learn and to grow in your equipping and to grow in your knowledge of what you're doing. So those are kind of the three biggest aspects of leadership: being a servant leader, being somebody of high integrity, and then being somebody who's very competent and who's good at the job, who does the job with excellence, strives for excellence in everything you do. So those are the three core components of good leaders that I've seen in my life, and that's what I want to model.
That's great. And taking those core leadership values, I want to ask, do you have a role model in politics or any other field that kind of embodies those core leadership values and that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so I've got a lot of role models, I think, or people that I really look up to. Again, I'm an American historian. I love the life of George Washington, or founding fathers like Benjamin Rush, Francis Asbury, Harry Hoosier. Many people don't know about Harry. He was the first Black evangelical Methodist pastor in America. He was one of the leaders in the First Great Awakening. We get our name as Hoosiers from Harry Hoosier. He was a Black preacher and preaching the freedom of God, and many people who got saved in the new territory, the Indiana, Ohio territory, were saved because of Harry Hoosier, and so they started calling them Hoosiers. And so there's people like that I just really look up to. I think in modern kind of in today's world, I can find people and take the strengths and kind of see their weaknesses too. So I take somebody like a Donald Trump. I look up to Donald Trump. He's not a perfect leader by any stretch of the imagination, but I value his courage, and I value his boldness to say what he truly is thinking. And I think there's an element there where I'm saying, okay, that's I need to learn from that. Like, how can I tell people, just be very, very bold and just say, hey, this is what I think. And you may not like it, and you may not like to hear it, but I would rather somebody be, very truthful with me than to try to, sugarcoat things with lies just because they think that's what I want to hear. So there's that. I've got a couple, friends and people that I walk with. Our current pastor at Life Church, who's over all four campuses at the church I work at. His name is Nathan Peter. Now he's a brother, just brother in Christ, and he's very, very knowledgeable in God's word and American history. And so I look up to him a lot. And then my parents were instrumental in laying the foundation and the groundwork of who I am today. So I think it's just kind of I love studying people, and I love learning from people. And so to say if there's one person that I model or look up to, it's hard for me, because there's so many people that I look to, and I say, okay, I can learn something from that person. And so that's I think that's how I've kind of always lived my life when it was looking up to different people. So
Sure. My fourth question for you here is, you've definitely trailblazed with the lieutenant governor race and letting the people have more of a voice, especially in that election. And that's definitely a good way for you to connect with constituents. And my question is, so communication is a key part of being a public official. And how are you going to consistently communicate with colleagues and constituents in the lieutenant governor office throughout your term?
Yeah, well, good. That's a good question. The first thing is just being available. I've seen politicians who get into office and then all of a sudden you can't ever reach them, right? And so it's just they get sort of surrounded by their gatekeepers and their handlers, and you can never reach them. I love talking to people. I mean, my team will tell you that I'm usually the last person to leave events because I'm talking to people, and so I'm going to consistently be that. I'm going to be available for people to chat with, whether you're at the State House. If you see me in the hallway of the State House, you can pull me aside for a conversation. If there's something on your mind, you can come to my office. I'll gladly welcome you in to, hear your concerns, hear your thoughts on what's going on. And then I think another big piece is just the modern tools of communication. So social media is a big part of that. So I'm going to be very active on social media. I've been active on social media for a long time. I think that's a great way to, let people know what you're thinking and let people know what you're doing. And so I think it's all of the above. I think it's first and foremost, you have to be available and willing to communicate. And then you've got to use the mechanisms and the kind of the lanes of communication within our culture. So whether that's modern mainstream media or whether that's social media or just, shaking hands with people as you see them on the street. So it's again, all of the above, but I plan to be very, very open from a communication standpoint with people on what I think and where I stand.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Next question for you is, it also goes hand in hand with communication and constituents, is how are you going to go about handling criticism in your position as lieutenant governor, whether it be with legislation or any other issue?
Yeah, well, criticism is not a bad thing. I mean, I think a lot of times people hear the word criticism and they run from it. I think as leaders, we need to welcome criticism. Criticism is it helps you maybe find some blind spots that you haven't thought of, or it helps you solidify what you truly believe. So, I get a lot of criticism from people on the other side of the political aisle from me. But I either have to know what I know and know why I know it, or if I don't know what I know well enough to be able to withstand criticism, then I obviously either don't know it well enough and I got to go back and learn, or I'm wrong and I need to change. So criticism to me is it's kind of that idea. Like that's when you get into the ring, you're sparring with people, and it teaches you how well do you know the issue, how well do you understand your own worldview. And I think criticism for me, I've been somebody that has welcomed criticism for many years. I love debate. I love stepping up and having to defend my worldview and my philosophy on life and government and leadership with people who drastically differ from me. I've always said what's more exciting for me is to be in a room full of people who totally disagree with me than to be in a room full of people who are ideologically aligned with me, and it's just more of an echo chamber. I would much rather do the former. I love getting in the rooms and being surrounded by people who just disagree with me, and so again, that helps me be better at what I am. The Bible says iron sharpens iron, and it's in the context of know what you know why you know it. Let other people come at you, and sometimes when iron is sharpening iron, it can be abrasive. Sparks can fly. It's not always the nicest of sounds, when you're sharpening two pieces of iron. But at the end of the day, what happens is both come out stronger. And so I think that's a good philosophy and principle that I live my life by, is never be afraid of the iron sharpening iron, and always be willing to receive criticism, and to and if you believe you're right, then stand up and defend what you believe in the face of criticism, and do it respectfully, do it out of a heart of love, but do it boldly and courageously too. So
I think that's a great mindset to have, especially as a public figure. My next question for you is a little bit more into policy as lieutenant governor legislation, and this is an issue that's especially popular with people my age and just the younger generation, is how will you go about tackling drug crime and use, specifically with younger children and teenagers in Indiana? And we see a lot of that coming in through the border, but just, drug use in general and fatalities with it.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's certainly heartbreaking. I was in youth ministry for many years, and I saw many lives wrecked because of addiction and drug use. One of the things that I'm pretty passionate about is making sure that we don't legalize marijuana in Indiana. That the spectrum, it's even on the Republican side, people are all over the spectrum on that one. Like I've got some great friends in the legislature who are very strong conservatives that believe that we should legalize marijuana, and then I've got others that are on the other side. I have seen in states like Colorado, states like Michigan. My brother-in-law is a state trooper in Michigan. I have seen the negative effects of what has happened when they've legalized marijuana. It's created more of a drug crisis. It becomes legal, so then people go for harder drugs. It becomes a gateway drug. It's a slippery slope drug. 1 in 3 automobile incidences in these states like Colorado are have some aspect of marijuana impairment that has been that troopers and law enforcement have found. It hasn't increased the revenue funding the way that they said it was from tax dollars, because you're spending more money and solving some of the problems that come with legalizing marijuana. So that's people will say, well, aren't you a limited government guy? And I am a limited government guy. I think what government should have as limited as a role in your life as possible. But there also is a point where government has a duty to defend the decency and the moral standards within society. And we've just seen a lot of negative effects with legalization of more drugs. And I just don't think that's the way. I think we've got to say, hey, this is the border, this is the boundary, and we're not going to let people just recklessly go willy-nilly anywhere they want, because that creates havoc for the whole of society. Now, I do think on the other end, we've got to be compassionate, and we've got to help people who are addicted and find themselves in really just hard places in life. It's, as a pastor, that's the other side of the equation, is we can carry out justice and put in boundaries with government, but then we've got to come alongside people and see them as people and say, how can we get you help? What do you need? And I look to personally, I think the faith communities have a big role to play in this. We've got to bring pastors and rabbis and imams together to where they can say, hey, how can we help the people in our community? Because government does a really bad job caring for people. It was never God's design for government to be a caretaker necessarily. Government's job from the beginning of time that God has ordained is to be the stewards of justice and protectors of liberty. But when it comes to caring for the sick, the orphan, the needy, the poor, the widow, that is not the government's role. Never has been. That's really the role of the church or the faith communities. And so we've got to, as government, we've got to inspire and incentivize faith communities to really be the hands and feet of Christ in their own communities. And that's really when you see people's lives change for the better. Government's a safety net when it comes to dealing with the opioid addiction crisis, but they're not really. They shouldn't really be the solution. And so, but I do know the solution lies within the faith community. So as a policy, I'd love to see policy that encourages faith communities to get involved with these problems. And I'm going to travel the state, and I'm going to do roundtables and listening sessions with faith leaders all over the state, and let them share with me what they need from a state resource perspective, and then I'm going to share with them what we believe from a state they could be doing to help the state to alleviate the burden of trying to care for people who really need help. So so anyway, I think it's a two sides of the coin, and both are very important. But so again, that's where I stand, and I'll just be very clear. I know a lot of legislators, a lot of people, even Mike Braun, my running mate. He was he's probably even a little bit different on the legalization of marijuana than I am, and that's okay. We can have those discussions. I think that's what makes our state and our nation a great nation. Is we can have these very respectful disagreements and over really important issues. So, but that's how I see it, and that's where I'll stand.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And next question for you is, how do you think your experience as a pastor, you touched on this a little bit, will transfer over to serving as lieutenant governor?
Well, I think again, going back to what I said at the beginning, leadership is all about being a servant leader. Servant leaders first and foremost have to see people, right? It's not about the office, I said, if I think that I'm something big or special, then I've lost the way. Like, I think one thing that drives me one thing that is a pet peeve of mine and really just frustrates me is when I see elected leaders who act like kings and queens. We do not have a monarchy here in the United States for a reason. We have servant leaders, civil leaders that go in as servants of the people. So really, I see myself lower than the people I represent. Like, and if I can't get off my high horse and see the people and meet them where they're at, then I have no business being in office. And as a pastor, I mean, that's the same attitude I carry into the pastoral roles. You know, I'm here because God's called me to serve my congregation. And so if I can't see the people, then I've missed the way. I'll tell you one quick story. I was in student ministry. This was probably, 15 years ago. It's a couple years into student ministry. I was working at a pretty big church in central Indiana, and I was getting ready for the service, the Sunday worship service in our student ministry, and I would oversee all the worship and creative arts, and programming the lights and getting the band charts ready and all that kind of stuff for the worship team. And there was this kid that walked into my office. He was probably, I think at the time, probably 14 years old. And he came in. I wasn't expecting him. I was in the middle of the work week. I was trying to get stuff ready for Sunday service. And he was kind of like just looking for, a place to kind of share. He was going through a little bit of a rough time, and he just wanted, he wanted me to, just kind of talk with him. Well, I was too busy doing the work of prepping for Sunday that I basically just kind of shoot him out. Like, I wasn't like extremely rude or anything, but I didn't let him really get into the details of what he wanted to talk about. And I just said, hey, I'm going to have to, do this another time. And he left. Right. And right after he left, man, I'll tell you what, it was like God just hit me with a ton of bricks. And I felt this overwhelming sense of conviction just come over me. And it wasn't an audible voice, but I just heard the Lord just whisper to me, you missed the boat because you failed to see the person that I was bringing into your purview. And if you ever stop seeing the people, then you have no business leading anywhere, whether that's in church, whether that's in government, whether that's in business, wherever you go, Micah. If you don't see the people, then you've missed it. And he said to me, I remember it just so clearly. He said, because I am about people. The greatest thing about who God is he cares about us, right? Like he is love. The Bible says God is love, and he loves us so much that he cares about us. He created all of this. He did the work of creation. And at the end of the day, he did it so he could be with us. And so if we forget that, and then we've missed the boat. And so I'll never forget that moment with that student that needed me to be there, and I just was too busy doing the job of being a pastor that I failed to see him. And so I've just I've taken that into my the rest of my life, just kind of, okay, I got to see the person and forget about the job, because the job's not important. It's the person that's important. And so I think that was a lesson that I learned, and I'll never forget it.
Last question here for you is, do you have any leadership advice for the next generation of Hoosiers and Americans wanting to go into political life, but also just going into a leadership role?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you got to know where you're called, right? I think understand how God has wired you. I knew when I was in like 7th grade, I knew more about American government than my peers did. And I don't know why I knew more about it. I just loved it. I had a heart for it. I understood kind of how it worked. And so even way back in my childhood, I just remember thinking, okay, I'm wired a little differently than maybe the majority of my peers. So maybe that's a clue that God is calling me to go down this path. So I think the way you're created, the way you're wired, is a clue in where God's leading you. So I always tell people, if you're going to go into politics, that's great. We need good people in politics, but don't go into politics unless you're called to go into politics. In the same way, I would say don't go to the mission field in China unless you're called to go to the mission field in China, or don't go into business unless you're called to go into business. And so I think my advice to students that are listening to this today is you've got, yourself, like you understand like some of the things that you're good at, especially as a teenager. You're starting to see, okay, I'm pretty good at this. I might be good at math, or I might be good at science, or I might be good at sports, or I might be good at business or understanding government. And I think that's a clue that that's probably how God has wired you for a reason, and start to explore those paths, right? Start to go down those paths and say, okay, for some reason it just clicked. I just get it. I'm a good writer, or I'm a good poet, or a musician, or whatever it might be. I think there's probably a breadcrumb there, like, okay, I'm supposed to go down this path. And I think that's the biggest advice I give to anyone is go where you're called to go. Don't just pick a random road and start walking, because that it may get you to a place that you don't ultimately want to be. And I think if you go down to the path that where you're called to go down, you're never going to work a day in your life, because you're just going to be passionate about it. And that's, I've been fortunate and blessed. I would have never thought, just, Gabe, I'll tell you this. I didn't go into college thinking that I was going to go into ministry or politics necessarily. Like I was a business road. I'm a business and economics major. My dad owns a business in Southern Michigan. I thought I was going to just go back and, work with him in the business. And yet how God called me and led me turned into this amazing, passionate journey that I've been on. And I wouldn't have it any other way, because God knew me better than I knew myself. And so I would just say learn to see kind of that trail, that of breadcrumbs that God has maybe put in front of you. And then you'll never work a day in your life. You'll love what you do. You'll have a purpose. You'll be able to get up every single day, excited for the day. You'll know that you're working towards an eternal reward, and everything we're doing now, if it's just for the here and now, there's no purpose in that. I mean, it's really empty. But if you know what you're doing, you're impacting the lives of people, and it will resonate through all of eternity. Boy, that gives you such a love for life, and you'll never want to not wake up, because you'll be like, okay, I'm ready to go again. I got a purpose and I got a calling. And so that's my biggest advice to students. And I know right now, especially in a lot of students' hearts around the country, there's thoughts of depression, anxiety, fear, suicide. I mean, all these things that are really taking the next generation by force. And I think the way to combat that is to know your purpose, to know why you exist. And really, you ultimately can't know why you exist unless you know the one who created you in the first place. And so that's what I'll leave you with. If you don't know the one who created you, you're never going to know why you're here. But if you find out who he is and go on that journey, your life is going to be full of joy. It's going to be abundant. It's going to be you're going to be passionate, and it doesn't mean it will always be easy. It just means that you're going to have a great purpose, and it'll be like adding rocket fuel to the rocket ship. So
thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith for Indiana. Thank you again for coming on the show. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you're interested in learning more about Lieutenant Governor-elect Beckwith and his platform, you can go to the description of this episode where I have his website listed. If you want to learn more about my show, go to GabrielGary.com. Again, that is GabrielGary.com, and check out my social media at Gabriel F. Gary on all platforms. And as always, stay tuned for the next episode, as I try to post at least once a month.